Welcome, lovely people, to my book review of the first book I ever pre-ordered. This is Just Stab Me Now by Jill Bearup. It is based on the Fantasy Heroine series, which is on YouTube. And I started watching the Fantasy Heroine series because I originally got into Jill Bearup's YouTube channel for her sword-related videos because at the time I was just beginning to write a fantasy book. It got around to Christmas, and I realized to myself that, she's writing a book. I like books. So we pre-ordered this. So this book has been out for like a week. An author named Caroline is writing a fantasy novel because her coffee shop romances are getting the constant critique that they are not original enough. So she decides to write a fantasy book out of spite. When I told my friend that while recommending her the book, she said, okay, I will take your copy as soon as you are finished with it. Basically, she's trying to use every trope ever. So she's trying to get her character Rosamund to go on an adventure with her hot enemy all the way from one country to the other country in order to save her children's inheritance from being taken out from under her because of the circumstances of her arranged marriage. But the characters don't seem to agree with that. Because Rosamund and Captain Collins, who doesn't get a first name until like fourth of the way through the book, well, they just want to be friends and, get the whole thing over with. I'd say that the actual fantasy book plot is the secondary plot, and the major plot is the plot about Caroline and her editor, Henry, and how she's writing the book. Her day job is not writing. And her boss, he is very bad at cybersecurity, so Caroline has to sort of go through it, and she finds this whole unraveling plot, and it's very interesting. The book was intended to be, slightly funny, because, well, it's an author talking to her characters. It's also just funny because of some of the more random scenes that just sort of take you by surprise. You've gotten used to things like, say, electric toothbrushes. The author is brushing her teeth with an electric toothbrush, and Leo arrives on the scene and thinks she has rabies because she's foaming at the mouth. It is a fantasy book. It's got the whole fictional worlds and queens and kings and all of that. So I'd say anyone who wants to read a fantasy book with some romance in it, or a book about a writer also with some romance in it, which it's actually both. So it's a 2-for-1. Occasionally the characters will mention something about being from a completely different genre, and Robin, I believe, was originally supposed to be in a pirate romance book, but then Caroline scrapped that idea and stuck him in her fantasy story. Robin is Rosamund, the fictional character's fictional character. Robin is Rosamund's friend from school. So the characters are another reason to read it. So anyone who enjoys character-driven plots, because it is not a story-driven plot. There is a story, but it is not the main focus of the narrative. The part with Caroline and Henry, her editor, sort of reminds me of a Mindy Starnes-Clark, like, chick lit thing, and then the fantasy part, sort of like a more character-driven version of Paulini. It's certainly not like Tolkien or Lewis, because she doesn't really describe much of the scenes. It's more just sort of describing how the characters feel and how they are, but if you enjoyed Christopher Paolini and Mindy Starnes-Clark, you'd probably like this. And until we see you again, make sure to make time for Tina Good Book.